Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining us today. Welcome to this very exciting session in the D4D Hub Gender and Digital Rights webinar series. And thank you for being part of this critical conversation on addressing gender and ethnicity bias in AI. My name is Céline Merissen. I'm gender and digital expert for the D4D Hub Secretariat, and I have the pleasure of guiding you through today's program. So very happy to do that. This webinar is part of a broader series co-organized by D4D Hub and Enable through its Digital for Girls and Women project. This series reflects our shared commitment to advancing a human-centric, gender transformative, and intersectional digital transformation. The D4D Hub Gender Strategy aims to embed gender equality, diversity, and inclusion into digital policies and programs. This webinar series is one of the ways that we that we chose to bring that strategy to life. And these webinars are not just about dialogue, it's really about building capacity, sharing best practices, and shaping digital ecosystem that empowers everyone across all dimensions of identity. So today we are very, very excited to focus on gender and ethnicity bias in artificial intelligence. It's a growing concern with very real consequences, as you will see today, as AI increasingly influences decisions in healthcare, hiring, policing, and finance, to name just a few. The underrepresentation of women and ethnic minorities in its design, but also in its governance, raises big red flags about fairness, transparency, and inclusivity. So our speakers today will take us deeper into these dynamics, how such biases emerge, what risks they pose, and most importantly, what we can do to mitigate them and create equitable AI systems. So we are especially excited today to welcome an excellent lineup of speakers, including Dr. Bhavani Rao, UNESCO Chair on Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, but also Mark David Longar, AI researcher with the OECD, Paul Mbua, founder and CEO of Zixtech Hub and member of the D4D Hub Private Sector Advisory Group, as well as some representatives from the EU member states who will share some inspiring good practices. So thank you again for joining us. We encourage you to participate actively, use the chat for your reflections, for your questions, and we will pick these questions later on in the session. So without further discussions, let's dive in. And to begin, I have the pleasure of introducing our first speaker. We are truly honored today to have to welcome Dr. Bhavani Rao. Dr. Bhavani Rao is the Dean of the School of Social and Behavioral Science at Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham, and she holds UNESCO Chair on Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment. She directs Amachi Labs and the Center for Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality, leading innovative research and grassroots program that empowers vulnerable communities, particularly rural women, through technology-driven vocational training and education. So with a background in physics, Dr. Bhavani has spent over 2 decades designing solutions that bridge emerging tech like AI with real-world impact. She's a core member of UNESCO Women for Ethical AI Network and has collaborated on global initiatives and publications to promote ethical, inclusive innovation. Most recently, she led the Civil 20 Working Group on Women's Empowerment during India's G20 presidency and launched the South Asia chapter of Women for Ethical. Dr. Bhavani will lay the foundation for understanding how gender and ethnicity bias emerge in AI, highlighting their real-world impact on vulnerable communities. And she will also share some inclusive frameworks and practical insights from fieldwork in India. Dr. Bhavani, we are truly humbled to have you today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Salim. That was a wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. I guess it's good morning for most of you. It's afternoon here. Thank you for having me on this webinar series. Quick just overview on gender and gender biases, and also biases on ethnicity or any minority group for that matter. It's like the proverbial garbage in, garbage out scenario. What does AI actually do? It is the collective knowledge of all of us that it processes through this black box, and it gives us information. That's kind of how Gen AI has been going, has been progressing. And so when you have data that is not clean, or data that is not complete, those gaps start reflecting in your outcomes. So this is kind of what you feed in. That's one of the bases. So very early on in this conversation, before UNESCO actually came out with this ethical AI frameworks, there were a few UNESCO chairs from Croatia, from France, me from India, and from the UK. We got together and we had a deliberation on exactly this. And very early studies have shown when AI was asked to characterize men and women, AI did a pretty nice job. It characterized men as noble and chivalrous and strong, and women as beautiful and sexy. The typical stereotypes, you can see that it kind of comes through AI. Not AI's fault. AI is a technology like any other. It just amplifies existing vulnerabilities. So if you give it a good story, it will amplify a good story. And if you give it a bad story, then it will amplify a bad story. And therefore, what we have traditionally as our collective knowledge, we know in many ways has gaps, because we have evolved in our ethics, we have evolved in our understanding as a human race and as a human collective. Things that were okay even 50, 60 years ago, before the wars, are not okay now. And our collective idea of ethics has also progressed since. And definitely not the entirety of world's literature actually does not grasp uh, and along with that, our ethics also changes from place to place, from context to context. There are universal ethics, and then there are contextual values that can define ethics in a slightly different way. For example, collectivistic societies may have slightly different value frameworks from those that are individualistic societies. And this is why it is important to have a very collective conversation about AI and ethics, and which is why we're very active as the Women for Ethical AI, as a group of women from all over the world that are discussing about the implications of ethics and biases in AI. And along with this proverbial garbage in, garbage out, we have the other proverbial black box. Now, we know with LLMs, we don't quite know how the algorithm works. With humans also, we don't necessarily know exactly how the human mind works. This is true. But the problem is that AI has far more access to information than any single human being ever can. And so our dependence on this grand intelligence, as you see it, it's just rapidly increasing, right? So we will tend, those who are wary are very wary. So they will start questioning every AI output. But if you look at just the general crowd, the way images, the way media, way everything is spreading, there is no knowledge whether something has been generated by AI, whether it's the truth, whether it's not the truth. There's no question of questioning what has been uh, um, given as an output by AI. I can see that in my students. They submit assignments all the time, copy pasting things from AI, and you're like, you can't do that. But they don't even have sometimes the discrimination to go through it and to know whether what they're getting from AI is right or wrong. And this is where it can get very dangerous, because we don't really know what goes inside AI. Now, if we know AI to be this magically, completely ethical, completely contextually sensitive thing, then maybe we could say, okay, there is a possibility that greater justice will come from AI, or a greater ethical output will come from AI than humans. And even now that may be true, but we know that it cannot be every single time because AI hallucinates and we do not know how it makes up things. The greatest danger in that is not the fact that AI sometimes gives weird outputs. It's the question is that we will actually take in those outputs without questioning it. When it's a human, we will always question because we know that there are limits to that person's knowledge, to that person's omniscience and omnipotence. But with AI, the kind of dependency that we have and that we see emerging is kind of very dangerous. And if you would like to think about how this actually plays out, why should that bother us? From very, again, early studies show that the kind of image processing that is there in AI, just because of a lack of data, renders certain populations as invisible. For example, facial recognition, it recognizes the white male face best, followed by the white female face. And faces of color and black faces are not something that AI can progress very well just because there's not enough images and enough data. Even if there are images, they are biased. And therefore, the way it will depict or understand an image of a person of color could be very different from the way it will interpret an image of a person who's white, and especially if a male that is who is white. Recently, there was another exercise that we all did in this WhatsApp group of Women for Ethical AI. So we just decided to ask ChatGPT, would you create an image of me just based on our chats so far? And it was interesting, 99.9% of every image that was generated was that of a white male. It didn't matter that we were all women in that group. It didn't matter that we were discussing AI and ethics and probably gender. The fact that we were in technical discussions, the images were all male. Interesting enough, all white, young male with glasses. So go figure. I have no idea where the glasses part of it comes up. But yeah. Yes, and while it may not like alarm you, it's just a funny thing, it's just a kink. But when you think of more serious consequences like hiring practices, how you disburse loans, whether you get selected for something or not, these are the places where it could really impact us if there are biases in the algorithms and in the data that we are entering into the AI. And this is still, we are talking about still the highly educated world, that the world that has access to cell phones, has the money and access to AI. We're talking about an entire world, maybe not in your countries, but in countries like India, we have a billion plus population. And a huge chunk of them are not people who have even the basic access to mobile phones. And that gender is a huge component of it. More boys in rural areas have access to even mobile phones than women. So when you even already have a digital divide, the access to your mobile phone plus AI just is going to make that gulf so much bigger and the consequences of that exclusion so much deeper. And as it is a struggle to bridge that gap. So how are we going to bridge that gap if it's only going to make it much, much wider? And then you have counter arguments to using AI, which is on the environmental side, saying that the consumption, energy consumptions of artificial intelligence are going to be so ginormous that the earth as an entity is not going to be able to handle the demands that are going to come from AI, let alone a billion people that are using it. So what is the ethics that is going to be applied? So do you leave out almost close to a billion people who are more likely half of that billion people women from not having access to that AI to make sure the environment is safe, and who gets the right to use it, who gets the right to be excluded from it? These are all not simple conversations, and even simple ethical constructs are not going to address these questions. So irrespective, the democracy in technology and inclusion in technology is a conversation that in itself becomes super critical and super important and must be considered in itself. We've always trusted leaders with great values and great morals. Those are the benchmarks that we look at leadership. Does the person have knowledge? Does the person have skills? Does that person have capacity to deal with complex situations? In some ways, we are putting a normal human being with an AI. Everybody becomes a super person and everybody becomes a leader in some sense, which is okay, provided your ethics and your value systems are right. Because a good leader and a good person and a strong value-based person will lead themselves and their community in the right direction. But if those north stars that you can pin yourself to, that you know that if you go in that direction, you cannot go off, if that is not set, then you are going to have a room full of dictators. And how catastrophic can that be? Again, here, women are always traditionally considered the peacemakers. This is something, this is a bias. It's a positive bias, but traditionally we think of women as peacemakers, largely because women tend to worry more about the families, and because they are the keepers of the vulnerable populations, the disabled, the elderly, the children, other men, the environment, and therefore their concerns are predominantly on the nurturing and the protection, the sustainability aspects of communities, and therefore their tendency to negotiate and demand for peace has been greater. And this is also another reason why it is important to have women, not just in terms of data, but also in terms of how technology is built and how technology is used to be at the centerpiece of the conversation. There is really no way out, not to mention that women are half the population of the entire world. And how we actually look at how are we dealing with this in rural India, because much of the work that I do is with underserved populations, especially in India, with a little bit of a footprint in Africa. And when I talk about villages, I'm talking about places that are really in the boondocks. There are no proper roads, there's no connectivity in a lot of these places, sometimes intermittent electricity. And how is it possible for us to leapfrog from this place of extreme vulnerabilities in a super rapidly changing world, so that that we can reduce this huge gap? And those are the challenges that we work with. And so our approach is typically a systemic approach. So we look at the whole thing as a system, as a complex system. Any intervention that you roll out in a complex system will shift the system, not always predictably and not always for the better. Sometimes intentionally you change some things positively, but you can also have unintended effects, just like AI came up with very positive, but can have some very serious and unintended consequences. And therefore we have a systems approach, and this has been traditionally very taxing. It is a lot of work to understand the system, because we see empowerment as the flip side of vulnerabilities. So we map the entire vulnerabilities of women in a particular community. Think of it this way: if there is a chain, links like a chain, you are only as strong as your weakest link. One hit on your weakest link and the whole chain falls apart, right? It's like the proverbial Achilles heel. Pardon my many proverbs in the talk, but just so that we can get a hang of what the sense is. And therefore, to address vulnerabilities in a system is a move towards empowerment. That's the typical approach that we take. So in many ways, AI is very, very helpful in analyzing a lot of data, in gathering a lot of information and processing the information. Again, we run into the same problems over here: is what data? Are the women there in the data? So a lot of the work that we do is to gather information from the ground up. This kind of information doesn't exist in any kind of secondary data sets. If you really look, most of the data stops maybe maximum at the household level, but not even that much. So we really drill down to the grassroots. And then now with the tools that we have a greater capacity to process a lot more data. And part of what we do is also try and build tools using the existing data with safeguards in place to create tools that would help women at the grassroots level. If there is a woman who's starting a tailoring enterprise, can we create a tool for her instead of her trying to learn the entire process, like what an MBA graduate will take 2 years in a very high level school to learn to start a business and run a business effectively? It's a huge cognitive overload for her to figure out every single thing from scratch. One of the ways we usually offset it is to help people in groups and multi-scalar group, but we can also build multi-skill tools to help women start businesses, run businesses effectively. So these are the areas, and this is how we are working in the grassroots level. Many variations of that. We help farmers and women farmers, especially, keep a tab on the plant health in their fields. So acres of lands just by like a photo monitoring on how the plants are growing, to give them reports on the health of plants. We have a medley of tools that we are developing, and we're continuously refining to help women in these rural areas. This is the kind of work that we have been involved in. Again, trying to make sure that they're not left out of the development, trying to see how best they can use it, what works for them, what is intuitive to them, what is counterintuitive to them, to make sure that, that we address their needs as well. This is kind of out. Apart from this, of course, focus a lot on bringing what could be the nuances that come from the South Asia chapter from Ethical AI. We have our own cultural angles, we have our own cultural biases to discuss this within our countries that are involved in the South Asia chapter, to bring our findings to the world levels, so the entire group on Women for Ethical AI understand the contextual realities and problems that happen exclusively in the South Asian zone. So at the grassroots, we work in developing tools. We also try and see how we can make sure that we also have more women in the development of AI. So we're also an educational institution. So we have several programs, hackathons, scholarships to encourage women in the entire AI development cycle. Yeah, it's a little bit of what we do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhavani, for setting the scene with such thought-provoking and impactful insight from your work in the field in India, but also a bit in Africa, as you said. It really offers us an essential perspective as we strive for more inclusive and responsible digital ecosystem. I particularly liked some of the sentence that you use. If you give it to the AI a good story, it will amplify it. If you give it a bad one, then it will also amplify it. So what's our role in that? But also the fact that you talk about different value frameworks in different societies. So how can we work all together to make AI better based on this statement? So thank you so much for that. Let's now move to our second speaker, Mark Longar, to discuss evidences and trends in bias and tools to mitigate the risk. So Mark David Longar is an AI researcher. Is focusing on the societal impact of AI. At the OECD, he works on projects at the intersection of AI and public policy, including enhancing access to policy documents and monitoring AI incidents. He also conducts research at the Joseph Stephan Institute on multi-hop reasoning and AI safety. Mark has a background in mathematics and computer science with a keen interest in developing robust AI solutions. So Mark, we are very glad to have you with us today. We would like to hear your thoughts on how real-world data on AI bias, like the information from the OECD AI Incident Monitor, can help us understand current trends and support real change, toward fairer and more inclusive AI system. So Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you just confirm you see
Yes.
what's on my screen? Okay, great. So good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today to share some of our work the OECD has been doing on AI incidents. So I don't need to tell you that the number of the use of AI has exploded in the last couple of years. This chart shows the number of reported AI incidents and hazards in the news, and it's been rising, especially since the release of ChatGPT in late 2022. Um, this increase is, of course, linked to the faster adoption of AI, as well as more attention on these issues. And policymakers, among others, have identified the need to report and monitor events where AI and the use of AI has had or poses a risk to society. Uh, this is what we call an AI incident. So this is where our AI incidents monitor comes in, or the AIM. The AIM is a platform for global monitoring of AI incidents and hazards. We actually process about 10 million news articles per year and classify them and cluster them together into events we call AI incidents. The goals of the AIM include informing policy and regulation, as well as analyzing trends and identifying patterns. So let me highlight some of the patterns and trends we've been noticing. One obvious choice is deepfakes, or AI generated images and videos. Here we've noticed a disparity in the reporting, since a lot of the reporting focuses on how deepfakes target known figures such as politicians and celebrities, including for scams and AI pornography of them, while in reality, um, most of the reporting focuses on politicians and celebrities, while in fact the vast majority of victims are everyday people. So, for example, um, more than in South Korea, it's been recently reported that more than 10,000 victims of deepfakes have come forward, and the victims are disproportionately women as well as children. We've seen numerous websites pop up where you can take a photo of somebody, um, from your personal life, let's say, and without their consent, generate deepfake pornography of them. Another concerning trend we've seen with deepfakes is all over the globe, police have had to be called into schools because teenagers, young boys, were generating deepfake pornography of their underage schoolmates. Another trend I'd like to highlight is something that complements what Dr. Bhavani has mentioned, and it's the fact that LLMs, large language models such as ChatGPT, have slowly been replacing conventional search. For many people, uh, it's the first thing they turn to for getting their information. So why is this bad? Well, for one, we've heard a lot about hallucinations. It's when LLMs say something that it's just false. For example, we've seen events where some random Norwegian man has been um, uh, has been accused by ChatGPT of having murdered his children, or more recently, when AI chatbots have been used to spread misinformation, guised as fact checking. So, in order to understand why these hallucinations happen, we need to understand how LLMs work. LLMs are trained to predict the next most likely word. So in practice, this means that they predict what sentence is going to sound the best to a human, uh, linguistically speaking. But fact is that the truth doesn't work like that. If something sounds good, it does not mean that it's true. And the other way around, of course. If something is doesn't sound good linguistically, it could be completely true. And this is where most of the where well all of the hallucinations come from, because something sounds good, but in fact it only sounds good. It's not true, and we're led to believe it's true because um, we use them as a source of truth. Another problem with LLMs is their biases. Um, One such example of a bias is, let's say, an explicit bias, where it's been trained to say something. For example, with the Chinese DeepSeek models, it's spreading their claims that the Uyghur genocide is quote unquote slander. A more recent example is Elon Musk's Grok chatbot that spread the white genocide conspiracy theory in South Africa. If you didn't see it, it's almost comedic because somebody went and modified the system instructions for the chatbot to explicitly mention and perpetuate the conspiracy theory. And it's the chatbot started mentioning this in completely unrelated conversations. For example, here we have somebody asked it how many times HBO has changed their name, and it starts by answering the question, but then it quickly evolves in spreading the conspiracy theory. And while this attempt to spread propaganda is pretty overt, we have to ask ourselves, since most people's source of truth comes from these models, and since at the same time only a handful of people on Earth have the ability to control what these models say, we have to ask, who determines what the truth is in today's society? Another aspect is something that Dr. Bhavani has already touched on. It's the implicit bias that can be found in data. Um, like she said, garbage in, garbage out. Even if the data is real, um, the data itself can be biased by society. Let's say, like we've seen a platitude of incidents that have spread where AI has spread or reinforced gender stereotypes or discriminatory practices when hiring. For my closing remarks, I would like to make two statements. First is that we desperately need regulation. We need to regulate AI, and this regulation needs to be clear and have a clear path for compliance. And at the same time, it needs to be responsive and aligned with real world scenarios. Here is where tools like the AI incidents monitor come in handy, because it enables us to monitor what harms are being caused by AI systems in the real world in real time. My second point is that regulation alone is not enough. We are seeing AI transform society in front of our eyes, and fact is that if we want to change anything, if we want to make things better, we need to promote understanding of how AI works and where it's useful, as well as reevaluate on a societal level how and where it should be used and where it shouldn't be. And bottom line, if we want to make changes, we desperately need people who care about these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark, and we definitely care. That's why we are here. Thank you so much for your insightful presentation, for shedding the light on the importance of real-world data in identifying and addressing AI bias. So we noted we need regulation, but the regulation alone is not enough. So there's really a big conversation to have with different stakeholders to really make sure that we address problems and we use AI the right way, let's say. Thank you so much, Mark. And now we have the pleasure to welcome Paul Mboua, founder and CEO of Zix Tech Hub and a member of our private sector advisory group at the D4D Hub. Paul is an experienced entrepreneur and ecosystem builder. Is working at the intersection of technology, innovation, and inclusive development across more than 15 African countries. With over 17 years of experience designing and implementing programs that promote equitable access to digital opportunities. Is actively engaged in shaping digital policy, but also is an advocate for ethical and inclusive AI that truly reflects Africa's diverse social and cultural realities. So we're going to go back to this subject, very important again. So Paul, today we want to ask you what does responsible innovation looks like in the private sector when tackling AI bias, and what incentives or tools can truly help scale these practices across the industry. Paul, the floor is yours, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think it's really been an interesting conversation concerning gender and ethnicity biases with AI, and we also need to take a more regional approach, so looking at the specificities of each regions, and also be very deliberate in terms of contextualizing our approach when it has to do with national and also regional approaches to AI. Please, next slide. Okay, so we'll try to go deeply into addressing some of the biases and maybe not really speaking on behalf of all the private sector, but different segments of the private sector, how we're thinking about it and also discussing amongst ourselves in terms of our approaches to it, and also looking at some of the ethical incentives to reduce those biases. Then I'll give some of our concluding thoughts. Next slide, please. Okay, I think the approach that has been throughout AI adoption has really been diverse. So I would say, lots of research has been done in terms of AI, the large language models, and looking at in the last 5 years, we've seen the private sector trying to align itself and trying to find its foot, to what AI really means and how they could benefit from AI. So the approaches has really been varied. And we also need to have that at the back of our minds, right? The way a private sector, entity in Europe, Africa would approach AI is very different in terms of access to infrastructure, connectivity, and the various tools. So we've seen a surging, transformation or transition in terms of how the private sector wants to harness AI as a gold mine, right? So we've seen a pivot in terms of service offering, in terms of everything AI. So you get with talking with startups, across Europe, even in Africa, everyone is trying to embed AI somewhat in terms of their value proposition, and which is also a good thing, right? So we're seeing, AI doing a lot of great things in terms of agriculture in Africa, education, very important, healthcare, and even transforming businesses. So we're seeing lots of small businesses, because they're incorporating some level of AI, both in terms of the level of efficiency, productivity, just general data understanding, because I think that for small businesses, speaking from the level of small businesses, you'd see lots of small businesses need data-driven decisions, and we've seen AI play a very important role. But we know that AI has so much benefits, but when we see some sort of development, deployment within the private sector, definitely those biases, comes to life, because, as the previous speakers have said, AI doesn't exist in a void, but it, builds on underlying data that has been biased for so many years. So we move to the next slide concerning what should be the important takeaways, right, in terms of looking at the various actors. So when we're thinking about the private sector, they operate across this value chain. So first of all, if the data is skewed, if the data is overrepresented or underrepresented of certain demographics, definitely you'd have from the deployment, data which is already biased. So for my part, we're looking at across the value chain, which means from the data collection and analysis, we have to, be very inclusive, in terms of our approach. And this is not something that would be organic. We should think about it. So I think when we're talking about regulation, I would say we should think about more collaborative and inclusive regulation, and also incremental regulation. What do I mean by incremental regulation? So some private sector companies, entities are still catching up, right, to it. So if we bring, this arcades of regulation, it takes, it's like a wall, a brick wall, where the startups are seen as this is an opposition, this is a challenge, and definitely you'd see a lot of mismatch. But where we have incremental regulation, from soft landing regulations, and even looking at the progressiveness of the EU Act, I think that should also be the framework where the various country levels should be implemented. So if we're talking about private sector in Africa, we're looking at how do we start with soft landing, regulations, soft regulations, before going on to hard regulations, because it needs to be incremental. At the level of the model design and training, I would say this is where we also need to draw the balance, because for the private sector, some are thinking of profitability, right? So, which means, putting lots of constraint in terms of debiasing takes lots of investment. So I think for this to be taken into consideration, we need to see lots of investment in supporting the private sector to scale through, lots of discussions within the private sector, policymakers and other stakeholders, in terms of what should be the approach, right, in making debiasing models and also training these models. Then at the level of deployment, I think within the ecosystem, we've seen lots of utilization, negative utilization of the tools, and definitely, working with the different members, within the private sector, one of the feel is that you can't really control how someone uses the tool. So we also need to look at both sides of the coin, which is, bias, AI infrastructure or tool sets, but also the utilization at the level of the users. So I think it needs to be not just regulation at the level of the private sector and the various key players, but also at the level of utilization, right? Actively use of these tools, and also reporting where necessary. Next slide, please. Okay, I think things don't really happen by chance, and we've seen, in terms of the perspective of the private sector, so many things have to be driven, right? And we are looking at, in terms of private sector members, really carefully curating their processes and structures, which is very important. Looking at how, as building responsible AI, we need to imbibe, a culture of diversity. I know it's really been a talk with the new, policy coming from the US in terms of, cutting down of a lot of diversity programs, which is sending a very wrong message. So I think within, the private sector advisory group, we really need to encourage, diversity, because it's important. So not just diversity in terms of diversity, but looking at the core development team, right? Do we have enough women? Do we have, enough minorities represented in those development teams? It's very important, because with that, you'll be able to spot biases within your own private entity. The next point would be using a community-oriented approach. So having, more integral community practice groups within the private sector where best practices can be shared. I think where we've seen development in other areas is where we have the leaders, for example, like Meta, like Microsoft, working with UNESCO on the ethical recommendation document. So we see the large players also coming into the play, where they are lending their voices and also incorporating the small players, for example, the startups, the business associations, and finding a more global perspective in that. I would say designing, the approach with designing in mind, the minorities is very important. And definitely, this is a cost element attached to it. So as private entities, you're thinking about your cost structure, you're thinking about profitability, you're thinking about ease of flow. But I think when we have a more inclusive design approach is very important. For the private sector, we have to hold ourselves accountable, right? As we're holding policymakers accountable. So where we've seen also things work out is where we have within these private sectors independent AI ethical review boards. Very important. Why do I say independent? Because every entity has an approach, has a way of doing things. So really independent simply means that they have the ability to really give, transparent reporting of what is happening and also showcase the risk. I think these are some of the things within the private sector. Some are already ahead in terms of the pack, but I think for the others, they are still catching up, to having independent internal review boards, right? Which is something that takes a lot of intentionality to do. Yes, the next slide, please. Okay, very important. So the discussion about AI, looking at it, is it a morality issue? Private entities, business organizations, trying to fit in? But from my perspective, I would say it would be more strategic, right? And these are some of the nuances or messages, key points that has to be drilled down. I would say at every level, large organizations, medium, small, startups, business associations, our approach is different. But we've seen across the last 3 years, where investors are more focused on more compliant AI practices, and I think that also is getting a lot of startups to shift in terms of their methodology, their practices, in terms of how they incorporate ethical and also equity, to reduce those biases. You've seen in terms of the large corporates where some of the top AI researchers are shifting camp, right? Because they are more, they are more geared towards ethical pathways. So, startups or private entities that, that showcase themselves as to be more ethical and, to consider gender and ethnicity, they attract definitely the best and the ethical talents. And that's what we're seeing across the ecosystem. I would say the regulatory approach definitely causes a shift in terms of the ecosystem, but my plea would be, a more collaborative regulatory approach, having all the different stakeholders, having a voice in terms of what regulation simply means, right? And how it can be implemented. So those are some of our thoughts when it has to do with being more collaborative. So we are seeing also across the ecosystem more partnership. So this is what we want to see, more partnership between the various stakeholders, a lot of training, capacity building that has to be done at the level of the private sector, in terms of the various teams, because it takes a lot for culture within an organization to change. So we want to see lots of capacity building, lots of training. As I've said, a lot of incremental collaborative approach in terms of regulation. Definitely, there's an imbalance in terms of the large corporates having large investment, capital to invest in AI research and development, and having, the startups and the small businesses not having that level of AI research and development capital also suffer. So in terms of, trying to bring that balance into how the smaller players can also have, some sort of, access to funds for AI research and development, and also some sort of infrastructure, I think would be good for an inclusive AI enabling environment. So those would be some of our thoughts in terms of how the private sector is trying to align to promote, equity and also gender inclusivity in the various AI models within the private sector. Thank you very much.
Paul, thank you so much for your compelling contribution. As a CEO and founder of your hub, but also as regional chair of D4D Hub PSAC. Thanks for sharing your deep experience in the private sector. I was really interested to learn more about the incentive of private sector to really dive into this discussion, to go beyond morality or fitting in, but seeing it in a really strategic way with different propositions on that and seeing that it's already that way. So thank you so much, Paul, for your contribution. We really appreciated your perspective. So I would like to thank all our speakers. Dr. Bhavani unfortunately had to leave us, but we are still with Paul and Mark. They're going to stay with us a bit longer. And we will now move to the next segment of the webinar. But while we transition, we just want to remind you that we are opening the chat for audience questions. So please feel free to start submitting your questions now in the chat. We will address them right after this section, and we will aim to answer as many as we can in the time that we have. So now we're going to turn to good practices from member states. It's concrete examples of how inclusive AI is being developed and implemented within D4D Hub members. So our first example comes from Germany. We are delighted today to have Luisa Olaya Hernandez from GIZ. Luisa will present on Fair Forward, a key initiative advancing inclusive AI. So Louisa, please feel free to introduce yourself. Thank you for joining us, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here. So yes, as already said, I'm part of the project Fair Forward, Artificial Intelligence for All, which is a project of GEZ that focuses on AI, on democratizing AI. So maybe we can go to the next slide. And I will just quickly present our project. The way we foster the democratization of AI is through fostering the creation and use of open source AI technology. And the way we do this is through three pillars of action, as we call them. And the first one, what we do is creating a open AI infrastructure in our partner countries. You can see here our partner countries are 7, 5 of which are in Africa, 2 of them are in Asia. You can see them here. Then the second thing that we do is we democratize the knowledge of AI in our partner countries. And then the third thing that we do is that we support our partner countries in the development of ethical AI frameworks. So I think this goes along of everything the speakers have already said. And then maybe we can jump to the use cases that we have developed already, which is next slide. So just as this is a little bit of like one example, but we do this in most of our data sets that we have developed or models. And this case comes from Indonesia. For this one, we have developed 3 data sets and language models of Indonesian languages. And the way we have made sure to make them as gender responsive as possible and as fair as possible is through guaranteeing an equal participation of women and men in all the AI cycle of this project. Then second, we have developed gender benchmarks for each of these languages. Indonesian languages, as many of like very like local languages, tend to, local I mean not colonial, former colonial languages, tend to be sometimes not gender languages. So what is interesting is that even though they're not gender quote unquote languages, they still could have bias. And that's why we created these benchmarks to make sure that they are not, or to reduce as much as possible the biases in these data sets. Then the other thing that we did is to make sure that more than 50% of the people in the team, like leading the team, were women. I think this is one thing that really works, always make sure that the team is as diverse as possible. And then the last thing is that we're trying to really make sure, at least that's something that we would like to have, and it's like start working with the queer community in Indonesia to kind of like reduce the bias existing in these data sets that are like could affect their community. So this is one of the examples, and now I can jump to the next one, which is in the next slide. And this one goes to the part of democratizing the knowledge of AI. And what we're trying to do is really opening the door for more women and minoritized groups to the field of AI and data science, or tech in general. And how do we do? Well, we try to train people that have no knowledge on AI or coding anything, and regardless of their background, academic background. This is what I mean. We have implemented already this program in South Africa, in Ghana, in Rwanda, and is currently being implemented in Uganda. The target audience that we have used in these African countries have been unemployed people or students, because we really want to improve their possibilities to get a job. And that's why you see this target audience. However, it is highly adaptable, and the case is that right now we are implementing with other GEZ projects this training in Colombia for civil society organizations. So this is what happens when you create a product that is really opening the door to, like, is as accessible as possible. That when you make something very accessible, you guarantee that many people can benefit. So it's like when we have elevators in our cities, right? Not only people with disabilities can benefit with that for that. It's like everyone can benefit of using this. So this is what we're trying to look for. This training lasts 5 months, and we really take people from what we say from 0 to hero, which means that 0 coding experience to machine learning level. Maybe we can go to the next part so you can see a little bit of the content that we have. The next slide. Here you can see that we have as one of our main partners, the Intel Corporation. They have helped us with bringing the AI for current workforce, which, as we say, is a piece of the whole cake of curriculum that we have in the bootcamp, but it's a very cool collaboration that we have with private sector, and that actually helps the employment of these people, because they will not only receive our certificate, but they're also receiving the certificate of Intel, which I think is very cool to have on their CVs. Then we can jump into the next slide, please. And then you will may wonder what makes really different this training from all of the others. We really try to tailor the program considering the visible and invisible barriers that women have to face, or also minoritized groups have to face to join the field of AI. And this is a little bit about what Madame Bhavani was talking about, like the nurturing role that we all have, like as women, or tend to have. And this is why the schedules tends to be very flexible, to really help in their balance their personal lives with this training, this upskilling opportunity. We also make sure that when we have on-site sessions, we have childcare spaces, and that kids feel welcome to be there, and mothers feel welcome to be part of the training. We actually, in the call for applications, always make sure to say moms are welcome to join. We really are very clear about this, because otherwise maybe they could feel like, oh, this is not for me. Then we also make sure to have role models in the training. So this means that we have always more than 50% of the trainers are women, but we also have mentors joining, and people like telling their inspiring stories, or how they arrived in the field of AI and data science, and how can the trainees do the same. And then we really try to not only give them some like strengthen their hard skills, but also strengthen their soft skills to improve their employability. So maybe we can jump to the next one. Here you can see that we have actually done an impact survey recently of the 3 bootcamps that have already finished. And as you can see, and I think one of the biggest successes of this program is to break the stereotype that women don't want to join AI, that we're not interested into STEM. I think, as you can see, we have received more like around 8,000 applications already in our program, and for like 180 slots. And this shows that it's not that we are not, or as women and minorities are not interested in joining the field, and this is the reason why there are like only 30% of women in the field. It's because we are not doing it interesting enough, and programs are not tailored enough for people to make it interesting and welcoming. And as you can see, this is a little medium-term impact, but we can see that it has really improved their confidence on what they can do. And actually, it could have like, we're not implying causability, but causation here, but it has, at least they have, some of them have improved their employment their employability by 30% at least. So, but again, not implying causation, because I think we don't have the tools to say that at the moment. Then I guess we can jump to the next part. That is, we're trying to make this as sustainable as possible, scalable as possible. And right now, this bootcamp is also turning into an e-learning course that will be hosted in our platform Atingi, but also in our partners platform Nemisa in South Africa. And we're planning to do an e-live learning course where we hope we can train more people and make it as cheap as possible to train different types of civil society levels, like not only maybe students, but also other types of organizations, other types of people and organizations, sorry. And I guess if you're interested in knowing more about us, which is the next part, because we don't have much time, you can reach out to me. Here you have some of my contact details. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Luisa. It was so interesting to learn more about, to hear more, sorry, about democratized knowledge of AI. It's really connecting with what we talked about at the beginning of the session. So very interesting, and you know the real life examples that you shared from the programs led by GIZ, talking about visible and invisible bias, sustainability, really important as well. So thank you so much for your insight. Next, I am very pleased to welcome Sebastian Ott from Enable, and he will share with us some lessons from digital rights protection of the Palestinian youth. So very interesting subject. Sebastian, please feel free to introduce yourself in more details, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? All good? Okay, great. So hi, my name is Sebastian. I work for Enable as a digital expert. And I've been covering a few of our stories on artificial intelligence for the past few months. Today, I wanted to talk about a project that we've been doing in Palestine on digital rights, and I'll explain the link to AI. So basically, as a short introduction, when we talk about digital transformation these days, we tend to think about infrastructure, connectivity, and sometimes a lot of the discourse around innovation. But at Enable, in our digital transformation strategy, we have 4 pillars, and one of them is digital rights. For our work that we do, promoting digital rights isn't just about protecting the freedom of humans online, but also about safeguarding the dignity, the agency, and making sure that the human is included in today's digital world ecosystem. So our DNA at Enable is really about fostering and working with local expertise, local organizations. We try not to jump or parachute into solutions or just throw software at people, but we really try to work hand in hand with local organizations, because we believe that really like sustainable impact starts with working with the people who are closest to the challenges and solutions in the countries where we work. So this is sort of the approach that we've taken on one of our projects in Palestine on youth protection and civic engagement. And we worked hand in hand with one of the organizations working on the ground called Hamle. We've been working specifically to create safe digital spaces for the Palestinian youth. These spaces where they can express themselves, know their rights, and protect themselves online. Through this project, our goal is really to promote the respect for the youth's digital rights, raise awareness for the online threats that they may face, and really work hand in hand with civil society, youth activists, educators, public authorities, so that we can all together influence better policies. So through this project, we had 2 main objectives, which on the one hand was about raising awareness amongst both the public and decision makers on the risks and challenges that the youth faces in the digital space. But also on a second level, it was about strengthening the youth capacities so that they can understand and really fully use their digital rights in the online space. So to give you an idea of the activities that we undertook through this project, we started out with a baseline assessment of where the digital security of the Palestinian youth is at. We've had several university conference days to foster dialogue with researchers as well as students. We've organized 3 national awareness campaigns on digital security. We've drafted 3 position papers advocating for digital rights. There were also 15 policy advocacy meetings with Palestinian decision makers, nearly 200 workshops, reaching about 3,000 young people from Palestine, 15 training sessions for educators, civil society organizations, and right defenders. And finally, we developed a digital security curriculum that's really tailored to the local context. And after all of this, you might be wondering, so what's the link? Why am I talking about digital rights? Why is creating a safe digital space connected to bias in AI? And I want to break it down into 2 main challenges that we're facing in this context. The first one relates to content moderation. I think all of us today use social media platforms, whether it be Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, etc. And many of these social media platforms use more and more AI to moderate content, to provide you with a personalized user experience, providing you with tailored ads, but they also use it to flag hate speech, remove harmful content, and they also have an ambition to keep community safe. But the problem is that sometimes these algorithms are trained on text corpus, which are predominantly English and other high resource languages such as German or French. And they tend to perform much worse in some other languages, in this case, Arabic or Hebrew, and of course, other languages, which I'll get to a bit later. But it has really big consequences for the situation on digital rights. And I wanted to highlight an investigation that was cited in The Guardian in 2024, which found that Meta had failed to moderate hate speech in Hebrew that was directed to Palestinians. At the same time, it was over moderating Arabic content, where it was often removing and censoring posts that might be a bit harmless. And so you've got this imbalance that's affecting the freedom of expression of a part of the population, but it's also to a certain extent undermining the potential documentation of human rights violations, and it distorts the truth of what's going on the ground. In some cases, it might also incite to hate, more hate, and contribute to real world harm in some cases. And I think I mean, it's already been cited previously by the previous speakers, but I believe that there's one of the root causes is also for this automatic content moderation, the text data sets that large language models are being used on for the moderation. And obviously, as I said, most of this data is in English, French, German, and some other dominant languages. But Arabic, just as many African languages, tends to be underrepresented, and more specifically for the different dialects and regional forms. And I'm taking the example of Arabic in this case, where if there are any Arab speakers in the call, you might be aware that the accent in Moroccan or Tunisian Arabic is very different from the one in Syria, Palestine, etc. And I also want to add maybe an anecdote on the African languages, where a lot of it is very often oral tradition, and so there might be an underrepresentation because of this linguistic structure, of course. And this tends to create low accuracy when you're asking questions in a specific language, as well as having a high bias in some cases. And this is bringing me to my second point, which is narrative control. Because bias in AI goes, of course, beyond moderation. It also affects the way that stories are told. We had a discussion recently at the Digital Rights and Inclusion Forum about the importance of critical thinking when you're using AI tools. Many of you in the call started out searching the internet by using Google. So you had this whole process of searching for information where you had to click a few links before getting your answer. And so you had this whole process where you still had to think about the answer that you were looking for. Whereas now, today, you use more, I mean, ChatGPT's site visits have been increasing exponentially, whilst Google's searches have been actually decreasing quite a lot. The point I'm trying to make is that when you're searching for or asking a question to ChatGPT, it's very often presented to you on a silver platter, and you tend to not go the extra step to question what's the content that's being provided to you. When it comes to this narrative control, AI-generated content, and sometimes translation, in the case of Palestinians, have portrayed Palestinians as predominantly in violent contexts, which can have the effect of reinforcing harmful stereotypes. So, for example, there was an example of translation engines turning from Arabic to English, Palestinians fighting for their freedom to Palestinian terrorists fighting for their freedom. In some other cases, image generators, sorry, that when you ask them to represent Palestinian figures, were creating armed figures. And unfortunately, these aren't bugs of the AI system. They're actually systemic issues. And it was discussed also previously, and thank you very much to the speakers for highlighting this. But very often the data sets are in some ways a representation of our society. And the issue is that sometimes AI will only reinforce the stereotypes that are already ingrained in our society. And these data sets, unfortunately, lack the representation. And so I want to maybe conclude with just a food for thought over here, where it's obvious when we're working in the digital ecosystem in many different contexts is that we don't have a one-size-fits-it-all solution. We at Enable, we really believe in localized and inclusive solutions. And I'll leave you with 3 points, which were already highlighted. It's always not the easiest to be the last one, but I think 3 points that are very important is the fact that we need more and more to set transparency standards for AI, understanding what type of data it's being trained on, what the code looks like, and how we can make sure that it's more representative of the different specificities of the world population. Also, we need more accountability and responsibility by tech companies when they're training these models on unbiased and data, basically. And finally, and I think I've highlighted it quite a lot, is that we need to co-design solutions with those who are affected to make sure that the digital space is more and more inclusive. And I believe that this is what managed to do to a certain extent through our work in Palestine. So, voilà. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope that you understand now that creating safe digital spaces isn't just about connectivity, that it's also about justice and inclusion, and that tackling biases in AI is really necessary for this type of work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, for leading us to this conversation, linking with the digital rights, human rights violations, with critical thinking that we already touched a bit before, and for doing the synthesis of that with some propositions, very important thing that we have to keep in mind, and that allow us to link with the questions that we got from the chat, because you were talking about transparency standards, about accountability of tech companies, co-designing solutions. And so you understand that I'm going to move now to the Q&A session. We have 5 minutes top, so we're going to try to be very short in the answers. This is a call to the speakers. But if we have more questions coming, we can also collect them and try to reach out to you after with some answers. So we got question from the chat from Jacob, was asking and linking with what Sebastian said. How can big tech can be held accountable for information that infringes on the rights of other online users? So about big tech responsibility. I don't know, Paul, maybe you want to take this question, but maybe Mark also has an answer. I have other questions coming in the chat.
Okay, I think it's more of that's where we have interregional regulations, right, come into play, because we have the tendency in some countries to thwart policies that we create, especially when we want when it has to do with politics, right? A lot of decisions are politically motivated. So where we have in-house countries, for example, not really living up to the standard of transparency, inclusivity, and rights, that's where we could have, for example, an AU Act, right, help in terms of bridging that gap, and also in terms of the policy regulations, because we need to know that if we don't have, higher policy cadres above some countries, for example, we have some countries that are dictatorial, and that would really try to streamline and stifle free speech. I think that's where we could have some level of solution at the AU level.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm going to go to the next question. Maybe this one for Mark, if you're up for it. So in the chat, we have a question from Martin, who's asking, as with other foundational digital skills, should an AI and related topics be integrated into schools' curricula or national digital training programs, starting from secondary education? So what do you think about it? Maybe Paul has also an opinion on that, but we want to cover with everybody.
Yeah, definitely. And I think my answer here also ties in with the next question from Kirsten, who says, who's basically saying, what can we do if other other countries out of our control are effectively ignoring all regulation? I think here I see, like I mentioned in my presentation, AI is coming. I mean, it in the next 10 years it will permeate all or many aspects of our society, and the way it is, I kind of see it as a tsunami coming into us, and as a society we need to I mean, we need regulation on our side, but if there's AI systems being developed without out of the scope of our own regulation, I think the best we can do is just work on the societal level. and this includes education, um, showing kids in schools how AI works and how to think critically, when and where to use it. Otherwise, yeah, we need as much of that as possible, I think, because like I mentioned, regulation alone is not going to be enough for this.
Thank you so much, Mark. And we have one last question, maybe to wrap it all. And sorry for putting you on the spot with this one, but if you have one last word or one key recommendation to make a step towards making AI fairer and more inclusive, what would it be? We're going to go with Paul and then Mark. Really, in a sentence, if it's possible, and then we will have to wrap up this session. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Paul. Sorry.
Okay, I would say more inclusive, collaborative approach with the various key stakeholders.
Thank you, Paul. And Mark, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that was perfect.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much to all our speakers and our D4D Hub member states for the really rich and thoughtful contributions, but also to our audience for the participation, the questions, and the reflections. So today's conversation has highlighted the deep-rooted challenges of gender and ethnicity bias in AI, but it also showcased that some solutions do exist, and we all have a part to play in this, whether through inclusive data practices, policy reforms, grassroots innovation, education. So yeah, we all have a role to play in that. So this webinar also reaffirmed the importance of integrating gender and human needs in the very inception of digital transformation efforts all together. And as part of the D4D Hub Gender and Digital Rights webinar series, today's session contributes to a broader learning journey that we started, one that brings together global expert policymakers, but also practitioners to really co-create a digital future that are fair, inclusive, and transformative. So really in line with the discussions today. So we hope that the insights shared today will feed directly into your work, whether you're designing programs or drafting policies or even engaging with communities on digital development. Just a couple of final notes before we close. So the webinar recording will be made available on the Access platform. So you can revisit it or you can share it with your colleagues. Just give us a few days to do that. And also we encourage you to stay connected via our mailing list for the D4D Hub members, but also our social media to hear coming sessions in the series. So on behalf of the D4D Hub Secretariat and Enable, but also all our partners, I really want to thank you for being part of today's important dialogue. Thanks to our speakers, to our audience, and we really look forward to continuing this journey with you. Have a great day.
Bye.